Parents abandoned me as a child because I wasn't as smart as my twin, but when they tried to reconnect 10 years later, I made sure they regretted it. About 10 years ago, when I was just 12, my parents sent me off to live with my uncle, my dad's older brother, out in the countryside. They basically decided they didn't want to deal with me anymore. I guess, in their eyes, I was just dead weight. They made it pretty clear they preferred raising my twin sister, who they thought had more potential than I ever did. And to be fair, she really was sharp, smarter than me in almost every way. I was just average. But in a family full of high achievers, being average felt like being invisible. My parents were both doctors, and from the time we were little, they had it set in stone that my sister and I would follow in their footsteps. But the thing is, I never had a passion for academics. I was drawn to creative stuff, music, stories, art. That's what lit me up inside. But that didn't matter to them. Instead of supporting me or encouraging me to do better, they just kept piling on the pressure. When I struggled in school, which I often did, they didn't ask how they could help. They just insulted me and constantly held me up against my sister as a failure. I'd gotten used to that kind of treatment early on, but as time went by, it got worse. Much worse. I could barely focus on anything anymore. By the time I hit middle school, I was failing most of my classes. And no matter how hard I tried, my grades just wouldn't improve. Teachers saw me as lazy and uninterested, not realizing what I was dealing with at home. To them, I was just some kid who wasn't putting in the effort. Meanwhile, everyone at school kept holding me up next to my twin, who was soaring. Every night I cried myself to sleep. I'd hear my parents praise my sister, telling her how proud they were, and then turn to me and remind me that I was a disappointment, that I needed to shape up. It broke me, little by little. One night, things really spiraled. We were having dinner, and they started tearing into me about my grades again. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I snapped. I yelled at them. And for that, they grounded me for 2 weeks. That night, I couldn't take it anymore, so I ran away. I didn't even know where I was going. I just had to get out. I ended up at a park nearby, sitting in the dark, scared and alone. Around 5 a.m., the cops found me and brought me back. That was the turning point. That was when my parents decided they were done with me for good. They told me I was being sent to live with my uncle and his family. When they broke the news, I begged them not to do it. I swore I'd try harder, that I'd change, that I wouldn't let them down again. But they didn't care. They told me flat out I'd failed them too many times. They said they had another child to think about, one who deserved their time and energy. Me? I was just someone who kept proving I wasn't worth the effort. I don't even think they were being honest with themselves. The truth is, they were always wrapped up in my sister. I was barely on their radar unless they needed someone to humiliate for doing poorly in school. I kept pleading with them not to send me away, not because I was scared of my uncle, but because I didn't want to be torn away from my sister. She was the only person in that house who ever treated me with kindness. But they wouldn't budge. They made me say goodbye to her, and then didn't even let her come with us when they drove me out to the countryside. Once I got there, I cried every single day for weeks. I just wanted to go back. I called my parents over and over, but they never picked up. Thankfully, my uncle and aunt were kind. They could see how broken I was and did their best to support me through it. Eventually, I stopped fighting it and accepted this was my life now. I still kept in touch with my sister, but we had to be careful. She didn't have a phone, so I had to call her from the house phone whenever our parents weren't around. Social media was just becoming a thing back then, so she'd use the family computer to message me when she could. If the coast was clear, she'd let me know, and I'd call. Talking to her was the only thing that kept me grounded. We've stayed close ever since. That hasn't changed, and it never will. She kept me in the loop over the years, told me everything that was happening back home. Just a couple of weeks ago, she gave me a heads up that our parents were thinking about contacting me again, which gave me time to prepare myself mentally. For the past 10 years, I had no contact with them. At first, it was because they flat out refused to speak to me after dumping me at my uncle's house. I spent years there trying to rebuild myself while being completely ignored by the people who were supposed to love me most. After a while, I just gave up on the idea of ever reaching out to my parents again. They'd left me behind like I didn't matter, and to me, that was the end of it. Funny thing is, once I moved in with my uncle and aunt, life actually got a whole lot better. They didn't drown me in pressure like my parents used to, and slowly, I started doing better in school. I wasn't suddenly some genius or anything, still just average, but at least I wasn't failing everything. What made the real difference, though, was that my uncle and aunt let me do things outside of school. I got to be in school plays, play sports, stuff my parents never allowed. They believed any distraction like that would tank my grades. But with my aunt and uncle, I finally had the freedom to be myself, and I was genuinely happy for the first time in my life. Back when I lived with my parents, even talking to boys was forbidden. They thought it would ruin my focus. But out here, no one was breathing down my neck. I could talk to whoever I wanted and even bring friends over. That little bit of freedom turned out to be life-changing, because that's how I met the guy who eventually became my husband. We've been together for 7 years now. We started dating back in high school and stuck together through everything. We even went to the same college. I graduated last year, and just a week after our graduation, we got married in a small, intimate ceremony. Last month, we welcomed our son into the world. I don't live with my uncle and aunt anymore, but my husband and I bought a house just a few streets away from them. We see them often, and they visit us too, especially now that they're grandparents. I'm currently on maternity leave, so I get to be home with the baby for a few more weeks. As for my sister, she's been openly in contact with me these past few years. Once she turned 18, she decided she didn't need to hide anything anymore. There wasn't much our parents could do at that point. She was my maid of honor at the wedding and is now the godmother to our son. She's always stood by me. Just last week, while she was visiting us, she told me something unexpected. Our parents were planning to get in touch with me. They didn't know I was married or that I'd had a child. Honestly, most people had cut them off after what they did to me. It was a cold, heartless thing to do, and it didn't sit right with anyone in the family. My sister had never felt the need to tell them anything about my life, and I don't blame her. Apparently, after 10 years, they'd started feeling some kind of regret, and now they wanted to reconnect. She felt I deserved a heads up before they reached out, so I'd have time to process it instead of getting blindsided. Sure enough, a few days later, I got a message from them on social media. Just a simple, "Can we come visit you?" No apology. No explanation. Nothing. That message stung more than I expected. After all this time, they still couldn't say they were sorry. For a while, I considered just ignoring it completely. But then I had a better idea. Instead of brushing them off, I decided to let them see how good my life had turned out without them. I gave them my address and told them they could come over for dinner that weekend. I invited my uncle and aunt too, along with my sister, of course. My husband and baby would be there too. It was our house, after all. But I didn't tell anyone else my parents were coming. I wanted it to be a surprise. And oh boy, was it ever. Last weekend, just 3 days ago, they showed up, and everyone was stunned. Things got awkward fast. I hadn't seen my parents in a decade. No one in the family had. Actually, not since they cut all ties after dumping me off. That included my uncle and aunt. They'd wanted nothing to do with my parents ever since. You see, my parents had promised my uncle that they'd not only support me financially while I lived with him, but also stay in touch so I wouldn't feel completely abandoned. But they only kept half that promise. Sure, they sent money every month, but emotionally, they vanished. They were just relieved to wash their hands of me. That wasn't what my uncle had agreed to. He was deeply hurt by the way they deceived me and left me hanging, so he told the rest of the family what had happened. That caused a major rift. Everyone cut off my dad. Things got ugly. Still, my dad kept sending money until I turned 18. After that, silence. Anyway, once everyone had arrived at the dinner, I decided to take things up a notch. Before we ate, I stood up and made a toast. I leaned into the awkwardness. I wanted my parents to feel uncomfortable. Honestly, I wanted them to feel sorry, to feel ashamed. So I started talking about how beautiful the last 10 years of my life had been, how they stood in stark contrast to the first 12. I made it sound like a speech to thank my uncle and aunt, because they truly deserved it. They had done so much for me, given me a life full of care and stability. I thanked my husband for sticking by my side through everything. I thanked my sister for always being there, even when things were hard. But when it came to my parents, I didn't say a single word about them. I didn't thank them. I didn't even mention them. And they noticed. They sat there in silence, eyes cast down, not saying a thing. After I finished my speech, I took one last jab. I turned to my parents and told them I was finally ready to introduce them to my new family. You could see the shock hit them like a wave. When I said the words, "This is my new family," I don't think my parents were expecting anything like that. The moment those words left my mouth, my mom broke down. She literally burst into tears and ran out of the house. And to be honest, maybe that whole dinner would have been better if it hadn't happened at all. After they left, the rest of us sat through an incredibly awkward and quiet meal. No one touched the dessert. Frankly, I was relieved. The whole thing had gotten way too heavy, and I needed the night to just be over. Now, I've never liked my parents, not after everything they did. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe what I'd done wasn't exactly right either. I still hadn't had a chance to talk to my uncle and aunt since then. But both my sister and my husband said they thought I'd gone a little too far. They told me that if I didn't want to engage with my parents, I shouldn't have responded at all, setting them up to be humiliated like that wasn't necessary. I felt a mix of things: anger, guilt, confusion. I mean, was it really that bad to finally show them what life looked like without their constant judgment? Update 1. So far, the reactions have been split. Some folks think I owe my parents an apology, while others say I did what I had to. But almost everyone agrees that I should at least speak to my uncle and aunt, especially since I blindsided them that night. It had been a week since the dinner, and we hadn't really spoken. Part of it was that we were all busy, but I think the awkward tension played a role too. Nobody wanted to be the one to bring it up. So today, I bit the bullet and called my uncle. Before he could even say anything, I apologized. I told him I was sorry for inviting my parents without giving him and my aunt a heads up. He admitted he was shocked at first, but he said he got over it. He told me he hadn't reached out because he wasn't sure how I was feeling after that night. I looked pretty shaken. He agreed it had been uncomfortable, but in his words, it was water under the bridge. I called my aunt next and said the same thing. She reacted the same way, surprised, but forgiving. Once I talked to both of them, that weight of guilt started to lift. But as for my parents? No, I don't feel like I owe them an apology. Not after the way they deceived me, ignored me, and tossed me aside when I was a kid. Nobody would expect someone to feel sorry for reacting like I did after going through something like that. They haven't apologized to me, so why should I be the one to cave? I also sat down and talked to my husband about it, since he was the one who originally said I should maybe say sorry. I explained that what I did during the dinner was a bit harsh, but it came from a place of deep pain, and that pain came from how they treated me. After I explained, he got where I was coming from and didn't push the issue any further. I had the same talk with my sister. She was more on the fence, not totally convinced. But in the end, she told me it was my call. I'm the one who lived through it, so whatever I decided was fair. She hasn't been able to get in touch with our parents either. They've been completely silent since the dinner, and I'm guessing they're just laying low for now. But I know them. They won't stay quiet forever. Sooner or later, they'll reach out again, maybe to demand an apology, or maybe to start more drama. Either way, I'm bracing for it. Update 2. Quick side note. I've been seeing some comments going after my sister for keeping in touch with our parents. So let me clear this up. She's not trying to play both sides, and even if she is, I'm totally fine with it. No need to blow it up. She knows what they did to me was seriously wrong. But at the time, she was just a kid too. It's not like she had any power to change what happened. She disagreed with their decision even back then. But our opinions didn't matter at that age. The important thing is she never gave up on me. She stayed in touch the whole time. And that means more than anything. These days, the reason she's still speaking to them is because they're getting older. She feels like she'd carry guilt if she just cut them off completely. It's not some deep betrayal. She's just trying to do what feels right for her. So please, no more harsh words about her. There's a lot of love between us, and nothing anyone says is going to change that. Now, onto what happened today. Like I said in my last update, I figured my parents wouldn't just let that dinner go. They're not the type to swallow their pride and move on. So yeah, I was expecting some kind of comeback, and it finally happened. 10 days after the dinner, they went public with it, posted all about it on social media. I couldn't believe it at first. They've never been active online, but apparently this one event was important enough to break their silence. And just like I expected, the post was completely one-sided. They talked all about how hurt they were by what happened, but not a single word about what they did to me all those years ago. No mention of the deception, the abandonment, nothing. Just a pity party for themselves. Honestly, I wouldn't have cared much about that post if my parents had kept it within the family. Most of our relatives already don't talk to them because of how they abandoned me, so it wouldn't have caused any waves. But they went out of their way to stir trouble. They tagged my coworkers and my husband's colleagues too, even though he had nothing to do with any of this. Obviously, none of my coworkers knew the history I had with my parents. So when they got tagged in that post, they were blindsided, and my phone started blowing up almost immediately. Since I'm on maternity leave, I hadn't been checking my socials much. Most of my time and energy goes to my son, not scrolling online. But once people started messaging me, telling me to check what my parents had posted, I finally saw it, and I was stunned. I had no idea how to react. It was clear they had spent the last week digging through my online presence, probably stalking my profile, looking through photos, checking who I had tagged, to figure out who I worked with. That's the only way they could have found those accounts. It was deliberate. It was calculated. And it was meant to smear me. At first, I just stared at the screen in disbelief. But after a few minutes, I decided I wasn't going to let them shape the narrative. So I left a public comment on the post, telling the truth. I had nothing to hide. Yes, what I did at that dinner was intense, but it wasn't without reason. I explained how they dropped me off at my uncle's years ago and never stayed in touch. I pointed out that even when they reached out recently, they never apologized. Not then, and not when they showed up at my home. And that if they had apologized, maybe things would have turned out differently. I also messaged my coworkers privately and told them what had happened. I even apologized on my parents' behalf because none of them deserved to be dragged into this mess. My parents could have targeted me directly if they had something to say. Instead, they made it public and petty, which is completely unacceptable. I've been waiting for my husband to get home to talk to him about it. He mentioned earlier that he had a big client meeting today, so I didn't want to interrupt him while he was at work. Honestly, this drama is so childish that I figured I could handle it on my own for now. I already spoke to my sister. She agrees that our parents have lost it. They couldn't handle the public embarrassment, and now they're just spiraling. But even then, what they did, trying to ruin my reputation, crossed a major line. I haven't told my uncle and aunt yet. I know they'd be furious, and I didn't want to dump this on them while they're both tied up with work. They've done enough already, and I wanted to give them a break from all this nonsense. Update 3. So, a few hours have passed. It's around 8 p.m. now, and my whole support team is here, my uncle, aunt, sister, and my husband's finally back from work. We're all sitting around the table trying to figure out the best way to handle this. A lot of people suggested I get a lawyer involved, maybe even file a defamation case. But to be honest, I don't have the time or energy for that right now. I'd rather deal with this personally if I can. Legal action is a last resort. If my parents refuse to take the post down, then I'll consider it. So far, everyone has messaged them, asking them to remove it, but they've stayed completely silent. No replies. No changes. They haven't even deleted my comment from the post, which, in a weird way, I'm kind of thankful for. At least the truth is still out there for anyone who reads it. Unfortunately, that post is still gaining traction. I don't know why, but more and more people are seeing it, including acquaintances outside my immediate circle. Some have reached out, asking questions. I've tried removing the tag, but the post still shows up in people's feeds. Maybe it's some app glitch, or maybe they reshared it. Either way, it's exhausting. People keep messaging me, asking me to explain what happened, even though the whole story is right there in my comment. It's getting annoying. I just want this whole thing to be over. I'm really hoping HR doesn't get involved because that could mean serious trouble for my job, and I've worked way too hard to let my parents ruin that. For now, we're doing everything we can to convince them to take it down. But if they keep ignoring us, we may not have a choice but to go through a lawyer. Tomorrow, my sister said she'll go visit them in person. She's hoping that a face-to-face conversation might finally get through to them. And if that doesn't work, then yeah, we'll have to take the legal route. Honestly, I hate that it's come to this. I'm supposed to be enjoying maternity leave, making memories with my son, not getting dragged into this kind of mess. Update 4. So my sister went over to our parents' place earlier today. She spent about an hour with them, and just 30 minutes ago, she filled me in on how it went. Turns out, I was right. They were upset, more like furious. That's what pushed them to make the post in the first place. And yes, they admitted they had stalked my social media to track down my coworkers. That's honestly creepy, but at this point, it's the least of my concerns. My sister said she tried reasoning with them. She explained everything from my perspective, laid it all out. And their response? They said they'd take the post down, but only if I apologized first. The moment she said that, I told her it wasn't happening. I didn't do anything wrong. I stood by what I said and how I felt. And thankfully, she knew I wouldn't budge, so she told them straight up, don't expect an apology, because you're not getting one. She also warned them that if they didn't take the post down, I'd be lawyering up, and that wouldn't end well for them. After a full hour of going back and forth, they finally agreed to remove the post. But then they told her something else, to pass a message to me. They were cutting me off completely. No more contact. No inheritance. Nothing. You know what? Good. They can keep their inheritance. I never cared about it anyway. My husband and I are doing fine. We have careers. We're stable. We'll be successful with or without their money. And even if we're not rich, we'll be happy, and that matters more than anything. My sister told them all of that too. She made it clear that I don't care about being cut off, and that they should stop trying to hold power over me with things I don't even want. Now that the post is finally down, I'm planning to focus on what truly matters, my son. I've got just a few more weeks left of maternity leave, and I want to make every moment count. Thanks to everyone who supported me through this whole mess. Really, I mean it.